Louisa Ray is reading the letters of a dead man.
Maybe I'm just trying to understand something.
What?
Why we keep making the same mistakes over and over.
Well, the question he does pose.
Somewhat abashed, Adam Ewing recites from memory.
How do we know what things we can change and what things must remain sacred and inviolable?
Sonmi 451 is in magnetic shackles facing the archivist. Fabricants, she responds accusingly.
I've just one possible future.
Zachary listens in dread to the abbess. Possessed, she warns him of the dangerous days ahead.
Bridge broken, I'd be low. Hands are bleeding, can't let go. Enemy sleeping, don't slit that throat.
In a cheap hotel, Robert Frobisher signs a letter to his lover with
Yours eternally, R.F.
then shoots himself with a stolen Luger. Timothy Cavendish beams. After all the awfulness of the last few days, yes.
Tomorrow, life could begin afresh, afresh, afresh.
Cloud Atlas concerns 6 very different characters traversing very different times and very different spaces across the world over a duration of some 500 years. These vectors are a loop composed by a disjunctive mosaic of images, rendering a complex narration of disparate genres and tones, where the actions of each character responds to the crisis of their present, each simultaneously affecting and affecting the future. In so doing, Cloud Atlas creates a narrative that sees futurity as polysemous, a perspectival simultaneity of progress, stasis and decline. To make this argument, I employ Nietzsche, expressly Beyond Good and Evil, subtitled as it is, Prelude to a Philosophy of the Future. Such resonance with the film, in turn, provides a lens on Nietzsche's text, as staging the problems of the subject, society, drives, bodies and will in the present as a concern of a fundamental philosophy of the future, beyond brute oppositions of opened or closed, static or dynamic, freedom or necessity. And it is from this collision of worlds, the worlds of Beyond Good and Evil and Cloud Atlas, that there arises the possibility of hope. There are 3 series of images in Cloud Atlas that give rise to 3 very different mysterious signs. Adam Ewing, ill and exposed to the unbearable heat, collapses, overwhelmed witnessing the brutal treatment of the enslaved Atua. Under the care of Dr. Henry Goose, the young lawyer regains consciousness in a cot, his shirt rent apart. Although to all appearances Goose has merely loosened Ewing's collar so his patient may breathe more easily, there is an opportunistic glint in the good doctor's eye. The camera gives us a close-up of Ewing's chest. Around his neck there is a chain with a key. The camera lingers here. It has noticed something more and seems to be inviting us to look a little closer. On Ewing's left pectoral there is a brown smudge, a birthmark, shaped something like a star with a double tail. Goose does not register the birthmark, and why should he? He's more interested in the lawyer's riches, even impulsively fondling the key, which promises so much. And for us, we too certainly cannot yet attribute any significance to the birthmark. How could we? Almost immediately, and in another bed, we encounter a reoccurrence with Robert Frobisher and Rufus Sixsmith. Dozing under crumpled sheets in the wake of afternoon sex, the first shot of the lovers frames the pale skin of Frobisher's naked back, and again we see the comet, the camera tracking forward, making the birthmark its focus as it takes up more and more space at the centre of the screen. And very soon there's a third incident, now with investigative reporter Louisa Ray. Stranded during a power outage in a humid elevator with a man we soon recognise as the aged Sixsmith, Ray removes her jacket. Sixsmith notices something. That's a very peculiar birthmark. Yeah, my little comet, Ray replies, looking to her shoulder, the camera giving us a close-up of her gently pulling back the material of her vest. Sixsmith is silent for a moment and then tells Ray, I knew someone who had a birthmark that was similar to that. The film has become fully conscious of the comet birthmark, and it is in this way we see the emergence of the first mysterious sign of Cloud Atlas. The marked character becomes the body at the centre, the central image around which all the other images within each existempo-spatial domain orbit. Yet there is a problem with this understanding of the image. After quickly revealing the birthmarks of Ewing, Frobisher and Ray for the rest of the film, it is as if the camera is searching for the birthmark on the remaining central characters of the other three vectors, and the film must look in hidden places. For the Age publisher Timothy Cavendish, we journey into his past with a flashback. Teenage Timothy is spending a night with Ursula while her parents are away, and while undressing, the camera spies the comet birthmark on his right calf. With Somni 451 now under the protection of Heijo Chang of the Neo-Soul Resistance, we encounter her comet birthmark as she has her fabricant collar removed. These two instances appear together around a third of the way through Cloud Atlas. For the final occurrence with Zachary, the whole film and many years must pass. In his old age, long married to Merinim on another world, and as grandpappy telling a story surrounded by his little grandchildren. After finishing his tale, he gazes up into the night sky with a multitude of stars, and the camera pulls focus, and in one of the last shots of the film, we see the birthmark on the back of his now bald scalp. What then is the function of the sign of the comet birthmark? It appears unnecessary from the perspective of the diegesis of the films. It isn't needed to establish the central character for each of the vectors, and it has little, if any, bearing on the characters within the film. Significance is in excess of the image. As we have seen, each of the 6 vectors is populated by an ensemble, and in Cloud Atlas each ensemble is played by many of the same actors. This is not simply justified within the trajectory of the diegesis, where a single actor will play the same character at different ages. Rather, what concerns us here is how Cloud Atlas foregrounds the multiple appearances of the same actor in very different roles within each of the 6 spatio-temporal domains. And it is this aspect of the ensemble that will produce the second mysterious sign of Cloud Atlas. Actor Jim Sturgis, who plays Adam Ewing in the Pacific Voyage saga, would have roles in all the other 5 spatio-temporal domains, as well as taking a secondary role as Neo-Soul Resistance member Chang. There will be more fleeting appearances as a poverty-stricken hotel guest in Edinburgh, as the father of Sixsmith's niece, seen only in a photograph, and as one of a tumult of brawling Scottish footy fans. Sturgis even plays another Adam, Zachary's brother-in-law, in the post-apocalypse vector of the film. Alongside his central role as the composer Robert Frobisher, Ben Whishaw has minor roles as a record store clerk, enraptured by Frobisher's music on vinyl, a cabin boy aboard Ewing's ship bound for San Francisco, and as Georgette, the middle-aged wife of Timothy Cavendish's brother, Denholm. Halle Berry, who plays investigative reporter Louisa Ray, has a secondary role as Merinim in the post-apocalyptic vector, more minor roles as Jocasta, the German-Jewish wife of ageing composer Vivian Ayres, and Ovid in the Neo-Soul sequence. She also has fleeting appearances as a South Sea Island slave and as an Indian woman at an awards ceremony. Jim Broadbent, who plays debt-ridden publisher Timothy Cavendish, has a major secondary role as composer Vivian Ayres, a more minor secondary role as Captain Molyneux, and the fleeting roles of a Korean musician and a prescient. Duna Bay, in addition to her central character of Somni 451, plays Adam Ewing's wife Tilda, appears in a photograph as Megan's mother, and is a feisty Mexican woman whose dog is casually murdered. Hanks not only plays Zachary, but has a secondary role as Goose, and more minor secondary roles as gangster Orth Hoggins, and as the whistleblower and possible lover of Ray, Isaac Sachs. He's also seen fleetingly as a hotel manager, and in the film within a film as an actor playing the role of Timothy Cavendish. The multiple roles played by each of these 6 actors is achieved through prosthetics, makeup, costume, and of course performance. As may well have been noticed, such multiplicity often involves a radical transformation in the age, gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity and class of a character from the referent age, gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity and class of the actor. Some of these transformations will be more controversial than others. At the same time, these multiple roles played by single actors generate much of the fun of the film. Every shot of Cloud Atlas is like turning a page of Where's Wally. Each actor is a shell game. Actors wear a multitude of masks, and this procedure concerns not only the 6 actors anchored by their central roles, by the central characters in each of the vectors, but much of the cast. We might say we no longer have actors playing characters, but only characters, where an O replaces the E, where the character and actor are presented as having equal importance for the viewers. We no longer can say the actor becomes a character, but rather that a series of characters are grounded upon and unfold from an actor. What then is the function of the sign of the character? Once again, this sign has little or no bearing on the ensemble within each vector. Just as with the first mysterious sign of the comet, the second mysterious sign of the character appears unnecessary and even, in this case, risking unnecessary controversy. Cloud Atlas has a third and final mysterious sign. Adam Ewing's adventure concerns a treacherous journey from the Pacific Islands to San Francisco in 1849, and he records the events of the journey in a journal. Robert Frobisher composes a series of letters to his lover Six Smith, telling him of his relationship with Ayres and his wife, his work on eternal recurrence, and his own Cloud Atlas sextet. Louisa Ray spills the beans of her investigation into big oil and nuclear power to a young neighbour, Javier Gomez. Timothy Cavendish writes up his incarceration at a repressive old people's home into a screenplay entitled The Ghastly Ordeal of Timothy Cavendish. Sonny 451 is captured through 2 video recordings, the interview by the archivist and a speech during the revolution in Neo-Soul. And Zachary tells a story of his big island adventure many years later to his grandchildren, now an old man on a different planet. In other words, each of the vectors is, in its own way, chronicled. This, however, is only the first moment of the chronicle. Ewing's journal is published as the Pacific Journal of Adam Ewing and is discovered, in part at least, by Robert Frobisher at the House of Ayres. Frobisher's letters are treasured by Six Smith, and after the old man is murdered, Ray finds them beneath his corpse. Ray's adventures become a potential novel, Half-Lies, a Louisa Ray mystery, written up by the grown-up Gomez, and the manuscript submitted to Cavendish in his role as a publisher. Cavendish's screenplay will be made into a film, and a TikTok-like repeating clip of which will inspire Somni 451 during her servitude. And Somni 451's words will be written down and become the sacred text of the Valley people, the tribe to which Zachary belongs. In other words, the second moment of the chronicle is of a text produced in one vector appearing in and affecting its chronologically subsequent story. There are, of course, necessarily 2 exceptions here. The first and last story. There's no vector prior to Ewing's journey across the Pacific Ocean, and there's no vector subsequent to Zachary's adventure on Big Island and his sojourn on the off-world colony. But this lag reveals a third, and for me the essential and far more important, a surreptitious moment of the chronicle in the film, and in so doing that's what gives us the new sign. For each of the vectors is told from the perspective of the chronicle the character within it has produced. Hence the voiceovers in some of the vectors do not give us the immediate thoughts of the character in the present, but are rather a visualization of the chronicle. There'll be other techniques, but this is the essential point. Each of the stories are retroactively mediated through the media they'll become, and it's this that accounts for the disparate genres of each of the vectors. Genreification appears as the function of chronicle from which it is created. This is the crucial point then. None of the ensemble of each of the vectors are aware of the genre they are in. Seafaring yarn, melodramatic tragedy, conspiracy theory, zany comedy, sci-fi adventure, post-apocalyptic drama. So once again we must ask, what is the function of the sign? This time the sign of the chronicle. And once again we are presented with a mysterious sign to which the characters of Cloud Atlas have no access. How can we interpret these 3 signs? What is their relation? Do they achieve some kind of unity? Give meaning to Cloud Atlas? If we're not careful, these questions will easily lead us astray. We may encounter Cloud Atlas as a story of souls, a story of the immaterial soul, the immortal soul, and the reincarnating soul. Donna Peabody comments that Cloud Atlas is a movie with a message about the interconnectedness and evolution of souls. Matt Zoller Seitz believes the film to be a fable about reincarnation. Gabriel S. Estrada believes Cloud Atlas explores how the same soul is reincarnated into 6 bodies, struggles and times, and concerns the reincarnation of the film's 6 main protagonists. The film has a 6-part reincarnation theme and has transgender implications of soul reincarnation across differently gendered bodies. Thus, the 6 reincarnated lives construct a Buddhist-type reincarnation plot. Cloud Atlas is a reincarnation-themed movie. Kevin Bartoshak, Bailey Schultz and Andrea Velosa concur, writing, "Morality is addressed both in the individual storylines and also in how each of the storylines connect, with the actions of characters affecting their soul in the next setting. Accordingly, one of the most prevalent aspects of Eastern philosophy that is prominent in Cloud Atlas is the concept of rebirth and karma." However, if we consider Cloud Atlas from the perspective of the 3 cinematic signs of the comet, the characters and the chronicle, the film resists such an interpretation. Is it the comet birthmark that is supposed to mark an immaterial, immortal, reincarnating soul traversing each of the central characters through the spatio-temporal vectors? Or is it the bodies of the multitude of actors in each of their roles that provides us with the ground for the soul? Neither of these signs converge. The irresolvable trajectories of the sign of the comet and the sign of the characters resist this interpretation. If it is the sign of the comet that marks a soul, then what is the significance of the sign of the characters? And if it's a sign of the characters in all their multiplicities, what is the significance of the comet? Furthermore, the soul interpretation cannot account for the 3rd sign of the film, that of the chronicalization of the vectors, neither their chronological interconnections, let alone their mediatization. What interpretation allows these 3 signs in all their diversity to cohere, gives us the idea of the film immanent to the 3 series of images? I want to turn towards Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil to suggest a response. For Nietzsche provides us with a way not only to explicate and correlate the 3 signs, to tie them into a trefoil knot, so to speak, but also to cultivate a semiotic. Nietzsche's text allows us to interpret Cloud Atlas as not only a film that makes the future its theme, but sees the future as polysemous, as fundamentally perspectival. To begin, Nietzsche too rejects the idea of the immaterial, immortal and reincarnating soul. As he writes in the preface, the soul superstition is a folk superstition from time immemorial. The belief that the soul is something indestructible, eternal, indivisible, that is a monad, writes Nietzsche a little further on in the text, this belief must be thrown out. For the immortal soul is merely the old estate of a bygone faith. Nevertheless, between you and me, whispers Nietzsche in passage 12 of Beyond Good and Evil, there is absolutely no need to give up the soul itself and relinquish one of the oldest and most venerable hypotheses. Yet we must immediately ask, why does the soul appear in the text here within scare quotes? What does Nietzsche mean by the soul in this section of the book? Nietzsche continues, telling us the path lies open for new versions and sophistications of the soul hypothesis, with concepts like the mortal soul, and the soul as subject multiplicity, and the soul as a society constructed out of drives and affects. Our body, after all, Nietzsche clarifies in passage 19, is only a society constructed out of many souls. It is this triad of the body as mortal soul, multiplicious soul, and genealogical soul that forms Nietzsche's theory of drives, and, as we will see, can explicate and cohere the 3 signs of Cloud Atlas. Our world of desires and passions is the only thing given as real, writes Nietzsche in passage 36. We cannot get down or up to any reality except the reality of our drives. So for Nietzsche, the human, and indeed all life, is matter captured up as drives, matter itself derivative of the fundamental forces of the universe. Nietzsche draws upon the 18th century physicist Roger Joseph Boscovich for this idea of matter as an interpretation of force. Accordingly, he not only sees the idea of the immaterial, immortal and reincarnating soul as a dogmatic belief, but so too materialism. As Nietzsche puts it in passage 36, this theory allows us to understand the mechanistic world as a kind of life of the drives, where all the organic functions, self-regulation, assimilation, nutrition, excretion and metabolism, are still synthetically bound together. As we might say now, life emerges, evolves slowly, blurrily, fuzzily through structural chemistry in the oceans of the earth, in undersea alkaline vents. In the evolution of bodies, drives complexify, split off and diverge, enfold each other. Humanity, as did all life before it, emerges from these primordial drives, evolves as embodied drives which diversify into many cultures and moralities, and every one of us is a bundle or chaos or ensemble of drives. In this way, a human body is a multiplicity of affects, passions and desires, and each one of us orders our drives, or rather is ordered by a drive that takes command of us. We affirm a drive which becomes the centre around which all the other drives circulate. A person will have the legacy of multiple lineages in his body, writes Nietzsche, which means conflicting, and often not merely conflicting, drives that fight with each other and rarely leave each other alone. He also writes, every drive craves mastery, and all willing is simply a matter of commanding and obeying on the groundwork of many souls. The genealogical soul, the multiplicious soul and the mortal soul correspond to the three signs of Cloud Atlas: the chronicle, the characters and the comet. The sign of the chronicle in its layering gives us the logic of genealogy. Indeed, with the aged Zachary's oral retelling of his story to his grandchildren bookending the film, each of the other 5 stories effectively appear framed, each story framed within another story's frame, a diabolical mise en abîme of story within story within story and so on. With the sign of the characters, the logic of the ensemble film is exposed. This has the effect of creating a world, or 6 disparate worlds, which exposes the characters of each set as a contingent array, deployed differently within each set. The characters foreground the social world. They are the product of the social forces of the time they are in. Each character is a multiplicity of drives. The first sign of Cloud Atlas, the comet, is the logic of the subject, a self extracted from the human mass of selves, a central image, the mortal body at the centre, which commands the trajectory of action within each of the vectors of the film. Together, the 3 signs of Cloud Atlas correlate and are explicated through Nietzsche's theory of drives. And in Beyond Good and Evil, it is Nietzsche's theory of drives that will ground what he calls a new breed of philosophers, the new philosophers, or the philosophers of the future. Alexander Niemas points out that the philosopher of the future, to quote, need not necessarily be interpreted in the obvious chronological sense. Rather, a philosophy of the future need not be a philosophy that is composed in the future, but can also well be a philosophy that concerns the future. In this way, we can also see Cloud Atlas as concerned with the future. In other words, the 3 signs of the comet, characters and the chronicle not only are signs of selves, but also temporal signs, signs of the futural. And it is here something very interesting happens. For each of the 3 signs gives us a very different encounter with the future. The first sign of the comet interprets the future as giving us the promise of progress. Each vector has a central character that arises at a time of crisis and triumphs in the world, their victories and achievements inspiring people to come. Each episode an episode in the continuous movement towards a more progressive, equitable society. The comet is always a sign of crisis, seen at the birth of saviours, appearing on the coins of the victorious, woven into the tapestries of the winners of history. The mark of the comet is a dancing star. The second sign of the characters gives us an infinite series of permutations of horrors. From this perspective, there is stasis, an eternal situation of predator and prey, of victories that in the scheme of things seemingly are just reconfigured into another milieu with new iniquities. An unending series of new battles. We are always in the shadows. The second sign is thus a dice throw. Can it be a coincidence that there are 6 stories in Cloud Atlas? 6 stories like the 6 sides of a dice. The third sign of the chronicle, from the perspective of the mise en abîme of Zachary's story to his grandchildren, is a tale of decline, dissolution, apocalypse, the end of the world, the collapse of the environment, the death of a planet. Somehow, while everything else was going on, from the birth of the Anthropocene forward and into the future, rumbling beneath there was a surreptitious sign, at first very difficult to interpret, but slowly rising to the surface, into consciousness. With Zachary we stare into the abyss. 3 signs of futurity: simultaneous, polysemous, perspectival. The future is always all these things at the same time. Such is the idea of the futural that arises from the 3 signs of Cloud Atlas in their temporal aspect. And it is perhaps in this way that we can understand Nietzsche's philosophy of the future in Beyond Good and Evil. Philosophers of the future, the people who in the present take the future as their fundamental concern, must escape the abyss. And despite being caught in the unending repetitions of the dice throws of the world, must become dancing stars. Perhaps that is how to understand Nietzsche's cheerfulness. Where do we need to reach for our hopes? Asked Nietzsche towards the end of Beyond Good and Evil. Towards new philosophers, there is no alternative. Towards those sent out ahead, who in the present tie the knots and gather the force that compels the will of millennia into new channels, to teach humanity its future as its will, as dependent on a human will. And perhaps that is why we can encounter Cloud Atlas as a film of hope, with Ewing and Frobisher and Ray and Cavendish and Sonmi 451 and Zachary. For they are already an ensemble, a collective, all circling the event horizon of the abyss. And while there will never be a utopia, the solution, one way, while there will never be an end to dice throws of the world, they hold back the abyss even with their own suffering. Together they make the future their present concern. There was, is and will be no alternative.
Mind the words of Sanmi. Our lives are not our own. From womb to tomb, we are bound to others, past and present. And by each crime
and every kindness, we birth our future. The nature of our immortal lives is in the consequences of our words and deeds that go on apportioning themselves throughout all time.
What is soul? I don't know. Soul. Soul is the ring around your bathtub. What is soul? I don't know. Soul is a joint rolling toilet paper.